EA Sports. It's in the game.
Today we are diving into a true classic from the early 2000s, EA Sports Cricket 2002. For many of us, this was one of the first proper cricket games we ever played, and despite its age, it still holds a special place in the hearts of cricket gaming fans. Released in late 2001 for the PlayStation 2 and PC, Cricket 2002 was developed by HB Studios and published under the iconic EA Sports label. It was one of the earliest attempts to bring a full-fledged 3D cricket experience to consoles and computers, and while it wasn't perfect, it definitely set the tone for the games that followed. Let's start with the gameplay, which was surprisingly solid for its time. Batting in Cricket 2002 felt satisfying. The controls were simple, but there was a real sense of timing and positioning involved. If you mistimed your shot, you'd find yourself walking back to the pavilion pretty quickly. There were not a ton of different strokes compared to modern cricket games, but the basics were all there. Drives, cuts, pulls, and the occasional slog. Bowling was probably even better. You could control swing, spin, bounce, and length, and you actually had to think about how to outsmart the batsman. You couldn't just keep bowling the same delivery over and over. Batsmen would adapt. It added a nice layer of strategy, especially in longer formats like test matches. One thing that really stood out at the time was the fielding. Now, by today's standards, it's obviously pretty basic, but back in 2001, it felt like a leap forward. Players would dive to stop boundaries, misfills would occasionally happen, and direct hits were incredibly satisfying. That said, some animations were a little clunky. Fielders sometimes looked like they were gliding across the field rather than running, and some movements felt a bit robotic. But honestly, we didn't care much back then. It felt like a big step up from what cricket games had offered in the past. Visually, the game was quite impressive for its generation. The stadiums were detailed and atmospheric, with realistic shadows and decent lighting for day matches. Each venue had its own personality, whether it was the MCG, Lords, or Eden Gardens. Player models were a mixed bag. Some looked good, others not so much, and of course, you weren't going to get full licensing for every team. The game represented almost all international teams and players, but only Australia, England, New Zealand, and South Africa were fully licensed. There were 22 detailed officially licensed stadiums, but the crowd looked more like cardboard cutouts, but they did cheer and react to the gameplay, which helped keep the match atmosphere alive. Now, when it comes to sound, the game deserves some praise. The commentary was delivered by legendary Richie Benaud and Jim Maxwell. That familiar Aussie voice from Benaud brought a real sense of authenticity to the game. Sure, it wasn't perfect. The lines could sometimes be a bit repetitive or disconnected, especially when trying to announce player names. But for a 2001 title, the commentary added depth and made matches feel more real. Sound effects were pretty good too. The crack of the bat, the appeal for an LBW, the roar of the crowd after a boundary. Occasionally there were bugs where audio would cut out or go completely silent, but those were minor hiccups in the grand scheme of things. As far as game modes go, Cricket 2002 had a solid lineup. You could play standard one-day internationals, full-length test matches, participate in tournaments like the World Cup and World Series, and even unlock special teams featuring all-time greats. There was enough variety to keep you hooked for hours, especially when playing with friends. One of the standout features was the pitch and weather conditions. They actually affected gameplay. Overcast conditions made the ball swing more, a dry pitch offered more for the spinners. You had to think about your team selection and bowling choices depending on where and when you were playing, which added a nice layer of realism. The game's AI, while not perfect, was pretty solid. Opponents would learn from your patterns. If you kept bowling short balls outside the off stump, the AI would start to counter with uppercuts or aggressive square drives. That kind of adaptive behavior was rare in sports games back then, so it felt really rewarding when you managed to outsmart a batsman. Still, it wasn't without flaws. Some umpiring decisions were questionable, and like many games of that era, bugs were not uncommon. You might see a player getting run out with a glitchy animation or a ball clipping through the pad and still being called a catch. But again, for its time, it was impressive how much they got right. What really makes EA Sports Cricket 2002 memorable though is its legacy. This game laid the groundwork for Cricket 2004, 2005 and even influenced elements in Cricket 07. It was one of the first cricket games to feel like it was trying to simulate the sport rather than just arcade-style batting and bowling. Fans who played this back in the day often return to it or at least remember it fondly. It may not have the polish of today's titles, but it had the heart and a lot of innovation for its time. So does Cricket 2002 hold up today? Well, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're expecting lifelike graphics and motion capture animations, you'll probably find it dated. But if you can look past the rough edges, there's still a solid, enjoyable cricket game underneath. It offers an old school charm that's hard to replicate. There's something comforting about the simplicity and honesty of it all. No microtransactions, no gimmicks, just pure cricket. In the end, EA Cricket 2002 may not be the best cricket game ever made, but it was one of the most important. It brought a new level of depth and presentation to the genre and showed that cricket could be represented in video games in a meaningful way. For that alone, it deserves a respectful nod and maybe even a replay or two, just for old time's sake.